stakeout?
Yeah.
Stakeout.
Welcome.
Welcome to this thing.
Yeah.
That's it.
Welcome.
Hi.
Hi.
Wow.
Can you tell us about what happened at the meeting with the president?
Taking all this in.
Can you talk about your meeting with the president?
I think we had a good meeting with the president, and also Vice President Kamala Harris joined the meeting as well, where we talked about obviously the issue of gun reform and the need to have more gun violence prevention and the work that can be done potentially federally, but also at the state level, because as you all know, in the state of Tennessee, there's an effort by the governor to call a special session, which we completely support, to really address the issue of gun violence and gun violence reform. A couple of other really important things is the framing of this conversation. We started, this movement really was catalyzed in Tennessee because of a tragedy at the Covenant School. And what's happening now, the conversations that many people, Republicans and Democrats, are realizing is it is a moral issue. It is about our children. It is about our schools and not turning into war zones, but it's also about communities that are experiencing gun violence every single day, like the communities where I am from and a lot of other communities. And so we're seeing a lot of people in multiracial, intergenerational democracy represented by the Tennessee Three showing up and being heard. And I think that was really powerful. Justin, Gloria, Representative Jones,
Just really powerful to hear the message and to talk about continuing the movement, growing the movement, making sure that we're getting something done, because it's really lit a fire in Tennessee and people are motivated. Students are active and they're showing up, and parents are showing up, and there's just such incredible interest in getting something done in action. They literally say, you know, we are tired of thoughts and prayers. We want to see action. And I think that that's what they're showing up every day to demand, and both sides of the aisle are showing up every single day. And I think that's a critical piece that we need to be looking at, that a majority of Republicans also want to see legislation to take action against gun violence, to keep our kids safe in their schools. Talking to those moms that showed up the first day of the big protest of thousands, I dropped my kids off at school before I came here, and I'm wondering, are they going to be safe when I go to pick them up? Literally tearing up when they were talking about dropping their kids off at school that morning. So this is critical, and we have got to lift their voices.
What are some of the critical action items you discussed today with the president?
We talked about a lot of items. We talked about red flag laws. We talked about safe storage laws. We talked about assault weapons and what that would look like. So there were a lot of options, and as well as universal background checks and closing loopholes, things like that.
What did the president say to your request for a public health emergency?
So I want to first start by saying that when we went in there, we talked about how Tennessee can be a model for the nation. We came as Tennessee lawmakers, but we didn't just come as legislators. We came as voices of moral dissent as to what happened in our state. And so we lifted this issue above the partisan divide. This is not left or right, but we talked to the president about how this is a moral issue, an issue of conscience, an issue in the South where we are trying to build a multiracial democracy and challenge these extreme forces that, rather than passing an assault weapons ban, they assaulted our democracy, as we saw when we were expelled from the state legislature. So we talked to the president and vice president about why it's so critical for us to continue to lift up these movements in the South, to continue to lift up this multiracial movement of reconstruction that we're experiencing right now in Tennessee. And as I was sitting in the Oval Office, I saw the bust of Dr. King, I saw the bust of Rosa Parks, I saw the bust of Cesar Chavez, and what they did, all those people did is they acted outside of the political paradigm of what was possible, and they changed political realities, and that's what we talked about. I made a direct ask to the president that sometimes we have to do something outside of the ordinary. As John Lewis did when he sat on the floor of Congress, as we did when we went to the well of the Tennessee State House and demanded action on guns. And so we are going to continue to push and lift up the creative tension needed to get action on this item. Because for so long, this gun violence debate has been stuck in between this stalemate of left versus right. But we talked today about how it's a moral issue of right or wrong. And that is what we're lifting up and we'll continue to do at the state level, from the State House to the White House. And we didn't come here today representing ourselves, we came here representing the people of our state, the majority of whom across the political aisle want common sense gun laws. Republicans, independents, Democrats, they want action. And most importantly, we left here with the mandate of a message that we must protect kids and not guns. That is the message that we'll be going forward with from this meeting.
I have a part two, real quick. The other day, Reverend Barber came to Tennessee and held a march, and as an action from that, we saw you walking into the State House with baby caskets. That was a radical move. Can you speak to the radical nature of that and what you expected an outcome to be?
What is radical is to take an action when children are dying and to pass laws to protect gun manufacturers. What is radical is to have a mass shooting after mass shooting and to say all we can offer is thoughts and prayers. What is radical is a supermajority Republican legislature that is more beholden to the NRA than they are to the lives of our communities. That is radical. What we did was to stand in solidarity with the clergy who were bringing these caskets, clergy who had buried children, clergy who had buried congregants, to say that we can no longer just hide the issue. What this issue is, it's about life and death. And so these clergy who brought these caskets to the State House, what they were doing was trying to show and demonstrate for the world, like they did when Emmett Till's casket was open. Let the world see that in Nashville we had 3 9-year-olds lose their lives. 3 adults lose their lives and we did nothing about it. And so I would challenge that narrative, and I would say what is radical is inaction. What is radical is a status quo that will put money of special interests like the NRA and Tennessee Firearms Association over the lives of our children. That is radical.
How optimistic are you that enough Tennessee Republicans will support the proposal that Governor Lee backs in a special session? Do you think that's realistic?
The reality is thousands of Tennesseans have marched on our state capitol, mostly young people, advocating for change. Because there is a radical silence that is coming from people whose pockets are being filled by the National Rifle Association, the American Firearms Association, who are choosing to care more about what goes into their campaign funds rather than what goes into the schools and into the homes of people who are just trying to live their daily lives. What we believe is that people power can work. And that what we have seen even already from the governor is not because the governor has all of a sudden had some calling or awakening about the issue of gun violence and the need for gun reform. That's been an issue for decades now. We've needed gun reform. We needed to stop the assault weapons from being manufactured in our state. We needed to have universal background checks. We've needed to have red flag laws for a very long time. But what is changing in this moment, which is really important for the state of Tennessee and for the United States of America, is there is a majority that is rising up and speaking and marching and demanding that we do something. And so for the Republican Party, who too often likes the status quo than justice, who too often is okay supporting white supremacy and patriarchy than supporting policies that can keep children alive, the message has been very clear from Tennesseans, both Republican and Democrat, white and black and rich and poor, that
it's going to look like going to these Republican districts in the next month and knocking on doors, holding town hall meetings, holding rallies in their districts, and lifting up the issue and saying that we're not going to allow you to let this simmer down. That we ended session on Friday early because they thought it would die down, that people would forget about this. But what they don't realize is that we have a month to organize. And we're going to organize and travel across the state and continue to put pressure on them in their districts. And Representative Zachary is an example of how out of touch they are with what's happening in Tennessee. Tennessee is a multiracial democracy. That's what we stand here as ambassadors of, that we want this vision of a multiracial democracy, not this vision of a corporate special interest aligned white males who are not aligned with the everyday people of our state. And so we represent the future, which is why they're so threatened by this. We literally Memphis, Knoxville, Nashville, from one end of the state to the other. Multiracial, multi-generational, multi-faith. And that is the future. And so I want to say to the media is that Southern segregation had a saying that the South will rise again. We come here to say that the South will rise anew. We represent a new South that is rising. And that if we can transform the South, we can transform this nation. If we can get common sense gun laws passed in the South, we can get them passed in this nation. And so we hope that the national media will lift up what's happening in the South, because our people are pushing forward a new vision. And I think it's going to be a point where we are on the right side of history, and those who stand against us are not.
And all of these different organizations that you ask are wanting to join. What can we do? How do we get involved? More young people who are not connected to organizations are asking the same thing. Kentucky, after their bank shooting happened, they called us, some of those representatives. They showed up at our human chain that went from Vanderbilt Hospital to the legislature, 3 miles, 9,000 people. And several senators and representatives from Kentucky came down in solidarity. And we're going to talk with them back and forth about what we can do. So we've got other states reaching out. We're going to go across our state and wherever we can energize other folks. That's what we're going to keep doing.
You cannot expel hope and you can't expel a movement. Go ahead, your question.
Did Did you invite President Biden to Nashville to speak about this issue there, to continue to elevate this? And what did he say to that? And by chance, did his potential re-election bid come up by any chance? Did you discuss that at all? Would you like to see him run again?
We didn't talk about a re-election bid. What we're talking about is we didn't talk about re-election. We talked about reconstruction. We talked about resurrection of a movement around common sense gun law. We talked about this resurgence of hope in our state that is challenging these extreme special interests. And so we are stand in solidarity. Appreciate that the vice president made an emergency trip, something that was unheard of, the day after we were expelled, to stand with us and gave a speech in Fisk Chapel, a historically black college. And so, we hope that the White House will continue to stand in Tennessee, but they're showing that they care about what's happening in our state.
That's right.
I mean, I think it's unheard of. I think we're the first state lawmakers that come to this White House under this administration. I mean, they're showing that they stand with us, and by standing with us, standing with our people in our state. And so, I think that this is a strong support that we're getting from this White House. The fact that we're here today, that they tried to expel us from the State House and silence us, and the White House responded by coming to Tennessee. Right after the mass shooting, I want to say too is that First Lady Joe Biden was one of the first people to come to Nashville and stand with our community as we're mourning. I represent a part of Nashville, and so our community was grieving. The First Lady was with us there, and so I think that we want to continue to work with this White House and continue to lift up state legislatures like ours who need support, who must be elevated, because what we're dealing with is a form of authoritarianism, is a form of extremism that is harmful for all of our children. And I think that's what we want to continue to do.
What do you say to all the
Tennessee is often left behind.
The Congress, are you guys going to the Hill with congressmen there as well?
Say that again.
What else do you have here in your agenda in Washington? Are you guys going to the Hill?
So we will be here at least for another day, and we are talking to some leaders. We'll be talking to some over in the Eisenhower Bureau building in just a moment, and each of us are reaching out to connections that we have here, because the work that is going to happen, it won't actually just be what happens federally, although this is extremely important. Obviously, Congress needs to pass an assault weapons ban as they did in the 90s. Obviously, we need expanded universal background checks, these things that are very sensible. But when we are realizing what we represent and all the people that we are representing in Tennessee and the people who are asking for justice and change to happen, is also recognizing a lot of this work has to happen at the state level. And the truth of the matter is, the assaults on our democracy, the erosion of our democracy, is happening at the state level. State legislatures being run as ours is by Cameron Sexton is much more like a mobocracy than a democracy. And the reality is, if we do not keep pressure on the people at the state legislatures and the speakers and the lieutenant governors, we're going to continue to see lawmakers being expelled for advocating for common sense gun legislation reform. We're going to continue to see people, two youngest black lawmakers being expelled, but voices of dissent being persecuted by the government. If we do not take a stand and show that in Tennessee and in this country, those types of things are not acceptable. And so I believe that with the people-powered movement that has been resurrected and that is moving forward in Tennessee and across our country, there's reason to have hope and optimism, and reason to believe that these states can change and that our country can fulfill its promises to its children and to the communities that we say that we care about. And that's the oath that we swore. That's the oath that the president and the vice president swore, to protect the communities and the people in this country. And we need everyone, Republican and Democrat, to be in this movement with us. It is not a partisan issue to say that children should go to school and be safe. It's not partisan to say when you go to a bank, you shouldn't be worried about someone coming with an AR-15 that could do you harm. These things are not Democratic and Republican issues. This is just about who we are as people. And as Representative Jones said, it's a moral issue about what is right and what is wrong. And what we are seeing, and the reason to have hope, is that even in a state like Tennessee, a Republican-red state, we are seeing a governor determined that there is a time and a place and a moment where the status quo cannot work. And we are in this moment, in our movement. And we need more people to continue to join us, and more people, particularly in state legislatures, to push back against the status quo that is harming our community.
Well, so did you discuss messaging strategies to try to make it more palatable for some of those folks who are not on board with these gun reforms?
It's not about palatability. And Representative Johnson, it's not about palatability of messaging. All of us have a moral compass about what is right and wrong. And we know that it is wrong for a child to go to school at Covenant and not come home. We know that's wrong for three people's parents or grandparents to go to work and not come home because someone had an AR-15. It's not about palatability of messaging. It's about whether or not we have courage and a consciousness in our society and in our states and in our government to act to preserve what we say is important, which is the value of individuals' life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness.
Now, these people are parents. They're moms and dads. We don't think of them as Republicans and Democrats. They do not. They want to put their kids first. They want to put their kids before guns. And they're coming to the Capitol every day. The last 10 days, there was a group of Republican women that were there in support of passing legislation. And they were inside, they were in the gallery, they were all over. But this crosses all the lines. It is not a partisan issue, because there are as many Republicans coming forward as anyone else. And even I'm the one that lives in deep red East Tennessee, and even in my district, I polled this very issue, and a majority of Republicans, a majority of independents, and a majority of Democrats favor red flag laws and gun sense legislation in Red Knox County. And so it's there. We just need to lift up those voices.
Right. Does it feel like that's getting through to your Republican
Yes,
colleagues?
It is.
As we speak.
And we didn't have to even speak to them. I think our actions spoke to them, and they joined us. I mean, just because it's the right thing to do, because they're worried about their kids. They're worried about the safety of their communities. And they're going to stand up too. And I think that's something that our supermajority is just missing totally.
You mentioned
What
Congress.
gives you your courage? All three of you. What gives you your courage?
You mentioned Congressman John Lewis. I was wondering, did you guys talk about gun law, about voting rights, in your meetings?
We talked about the hope for democracy and this vision of a multiracial democracy, and about how John Lewis did something out of the ordinary when he let us sit in on the floor of Congress for gun legislation in 2016. And when our friend here asked us, what gives you hope?
Courage.
What gives us courage? We come here as Southern legislators in a state that has a tradition of attacking democracy, but also we come from a state where young people led a movement to challenging Jim Crow. That John Lewis, we mentioned him, came from Nashville. Diane Nash, Bernard Lafayette, young people. And so I come here 27, 28 as the youngest black lawmakers in that tradition, that prophetic tradition, to say that what we're doing is not just for us, but it's for those generations who are coming up after us. And it's lifting up that legacy of liberation that is also in the South. We come from the South, where it's not just about where the children of MLK and Rosa Parks challenge the children of O'Connor, the children of these white supremacists. And so we come in that tradition, that prophetic tradition. I work at Fisk University, where we have these young people leading a movement. And so what gives me courage is seeing these young people who came to our state capitol by the thousands, who walk out of class, these mothers whose children have died, who said, we're coming, like people like Shondell Brooks, whose son was shot in my district at the Waffle House in a mass shooting, and said, I'm going to use my grief and transform it into action to demand change. And no matter what happens, I'm going to be persistent and consistent and continue to push the issue. And so I think courage is something that can be contagious. We're seeing it where we were expelled, and it's lifted up a voice of a generation. We come here and we see this Gen Z, who I really believe is going to transform 2024. That their overreaction has launched back a backlash from these young people who are going to transform the political paradigm and the political possibilities of America. And if we can do it in the South is going to set the tone for the rest of the nation. I cannot emphasize that enough, that we come from Tennessee, that they said is a place that is forgotten, a place that is impossible for change. And we came here, we did something out of the ordinary, and it's lifted up our state to a national profile that is now inspiring courage across this nation. And so I think that is what gives me hope and gives me courage, is that solidarity, that multiracial, multi-generational coalition that we see that is being formed to transform the South.
And the fact that you asked that question, what does that say about the state of our politics? I don't think about it as courage. I did the right thing. We did the right thing, and for me, it didn't take courage to do what is right. I know people see it that way, but for me, I was doing what is right. What is sad is that today, a lot of folks don't have the political courage to stand for what's right and what is right for the 70,000 people that we serve.
Well,
thank you very much,
everyone.
everyone. Our legislators have to move to their next meeting.
That day, our mics were cut off, and we were prevented from talking several times. But the thousands of people who gathered, who were making demands in a state where you're told that things won't change, in an institution that prides itself on the status quo more than doing justice. It was seeing the faces of teenagers and high schoolers who were saying, I believe in democracy, and that the people who've been elected in this democratic institution will do right. And so for me, the courage comes from those voices of people who refuse to give up on this country, who refuse to give up on the beliefs and the ideals that we say and profess to have. And so for me and our community, our families, it is the voices of our community who refuse to stop crying out, even in the wilderness, for justice to roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream.
Thank you all.